When we totally switched products, especially from our first product, that was actually a really painful decision for me. We really believed in it. It was amazing. We had to pivot because it was about the viability of the business. And that even if you love the product or you love the idea of a product, doesn't mean you can never go to it later. But the business has to be viable, right? You have to have the foundation first.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, disruptors, and creators who are making things happen. My name is Michael T. Johnson, and I'm here with my co-host Tyler Kelly. And today we are at Venture Cafe Miami in Miami, Florida. So if you haven't been to Venture Cafe, it is the largest gathering of innovators, creatives, entrepreneurs in the entire world. So if you are near a Venture Cafe city, you're going to want to check out a Thursday night gathering. It's going to be a great time. You're going to meet some amazing people. Speaking of amazing people, we have Elizabeth De Zulueta with us tonight.
Yes. Hello.
Hi. Elizabeth, welcome to the show. Elizabeth is the founder of Zulubots, a robotics and automation company that develops robots for home and commercial applications. You have a BS and MS in robotics engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And you discovered robotics at 14 years old. And in 2009, you were a member of the BattleBots professional division, and you were the champion.
Yes.
So that's pretty cool. And then you did some stuff with NASA and DARPA Robotics Challenge, and then you're in an accident, and that's where Zulubots came from. And let's start there. You were in an accident that put you in a wheelchair for 3 months.
Yes.
That's insane. Tell me about that.
I was actually in a dance class.
Okay.
And we were doing this really interesting move and that involved a chair, and I fell off the chair.
Wow.
My right ankle gave out on me, and my left leg got caught in the chair. And I dislocated my kneecap, and I was subsequently taken to the hospital and put in an immobilizer. But the thing about knee injuries, if they put you in an immobilizer for too long, your entire leg atrophies. So I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't get to an MRI for like weeks at a time. And then, I ended up being in a wheelchair for about 3 months, which coincided when I was mentoring this team of girls that went to the BattleBots professional championship in 2015.
Okay.
So I actually come out in the beginning in my wheelchair. And so it was like a big struggle moving onto walking crutches. But while I was in the wheelchair and while I was on crutches, I learned how hard it is to do things around the house. And so even simple things, I want to go brush my teeth. I don't fit through the door, or I need to go get a glass of water, take my laundry to the laundry room. And you can't do any of that. Even on crutches, like your hands are on your crutches.
Wow.
So that was a big wake-up call. And then being in physical therapy, because I transitioned into physical therapy, I realized that I wasn't the only one having this problem. There were a lot of other patients, whether it be someone from an athlete that had vertebrae issues, or someone who was in a motorcycle accident that was also in PT with me, or just older people that as time had gone on, you age and your body changes as you age. And that doing stuff around the house is much more difficult. And so that's kind of where Zulubots started.
Wow. And that's the company, but you were doing all kinds of crazy stuff just as a kid with robots. Like you and your dad, right?
Yes. So both of my parents are engineers.
Okay.
My dad's aeronautical engineer, but he was kind of that guy that paid for engineering school through being a mechanic. My mom did more like the electronic side. She's more like the computer crazy person. And my dad just like loved building things. So my dad, with me and my brother, we'd all sit down and watch BattleBots and this show called Junkyard Wars. Now, if you haven't heard of Junkyard Wars, this show was epic.
No, I've heard of it, and I love this kind of stuff.
The show is epic. And so they just put all these people in a junkyard and tell them, okay, this is your challenge. And with whatever you can find, you got to build something to win the challenge. And the stuff that was built was insane. And so that's where I just fell in love with like, oh my God, you can just get random stuff that doesn't do anything and put it together and it does amazing stuff. And so that's where the drive came from.
Do they still do stuff like that? I would love to be on a Junkyard Wars team. That would be amazing.
Right? I don't know if they do Junkyard Wars stuff, but there are competitions all over the country where it is like that. You know, they give you a challenge and you design. And a lot of times you'll either be given like a weight specification or a size specification. It depends on the challenge. But yeah, there's still a lot of that stuff. And a lot of engineers get started in that way.
So it sounds like from your upbringing, there was no way that you were not going to be involved in what you were doing with parents that were engineers in kind of two different fields and all that kind of stuff.
What's actually funny is that my mom thought my entire life I would never become an engineer. I have a really big personality. And so she always thought I would do something, actress and I always thought the arts was really cool and I love music. And so she always thought I'd do something on that route. Dance is one of my big hobbies. But yeah, they just made science so much fun. And like, in my opinion, explosions and things like that, they're big.
Right.
So once I got addicted to BattleBots and I could do that, then yeah, that's how engineering really became part of me.
What does it take to become a champion at BattleBots? Like, what's that like?
So you definitely have to be a good builder, but actually the magic when it comes to being a good BattleBots competitor is being a good driver. Because by the time you get into like the professional division and like the upper levels of the league and the sport, you're dealing with other engineers, other experienced builders, right? So they're going to be building insane robots just like you. So it's about being able to outmaneuver them and outdrive them. And so that's really the magic. The strong frame, a lot of milling, actually.
Okay.
People think that it's like, okay, let me make a frame and it's separate parts, but actually it's much better to have like a base that's like from one piece, and you take a lot longer to make that one piece, but it's stronger that way. And then it's just low to the ground, heavy in the center, and outmaneuver them.
Yep. I feel like you just kind of waved the shiny object of BattleBots and we're like focused on that, but I'm sure that our conversation will go much deeper than that today. So, but I am curious, like, kind of what's your progression into Zulubots, and like what kind of problem did Zulubots set out to solve?
So when we first started, we started with a focus on assistive robots. My goal, and ultimately our goal as a company, is to have robots in the home. That's really where we see robotics going. And so we set out to solve the problem of having people feel more independent, right? Because when you feel like, well, because of this chair or my crutches or whatnot, or this injury, I can no longer get the groceries out of the car or move my laundry, it can be a little bit self-defeating. And so it was about helping people feel more independent. And so we focused on function. A lot of robots in this space, whether either they're tackling elder care or helping individuals that are differently abled, they focus on companionship. But no one really focuses on function. So that was where our focus was. And so originally we set out to develop robots that helped people lift and carry objects around their house.
And now you're doing...
So we pivoted a little bit into the beverage industry, touching a little bit of like industrial IoT. And so now we help bars and breweries track their taps in real time.
Which is pretty cool.
Yes.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that off air. Tell us about how like you're helping breweries and bars, become more technically savvy in terms of like when to change out their kegs and like when to reorder, all this type of cool stuff.
So a lot of the really big breweries are already kind of, trying to add a lot more technology. But we've noticed that still with like local breweries or smaller outfits, when you change a keg, they kind of like, oh, the tap is pouring a little slower. Let me grab the keg, shake it, they move it around. And it happens a lot through guesstimation. And an experienced bartender, they're going to be good at their job, but they still need the real-time data. And we noticed that none of the decisions are made based off data because there aren't a lot of devices out there. There isn't anything really tackling that on the market. So we realized that this is something we could build, this is something we could make. So that's how that got started.
And I mean, it's pretty cool because, correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially, like, you can tell through data, like, how, breweries can see how popular their different items are, like at what point,
Yep.
In advance, like, okay, this is going to be empty on Tuesday
Yes.
of next week, so we need to have a new one there.
Yeah.
So storage becomes less of an issue. Like, there's all these side benefits, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so if you can track your taps in real time, this part of the month, these beers are doing better, this tap is getting used more, why is this beer slightly going faster, even from the same batches, because sometimes in similar batches, similar beers, different batches will be slightly different and be like, the customer didn't like this batch as much.
Wow.
And so it can help also with like tracking inventory, tracking how your seasonal beers are doing. And then, we actually sold this much amount of this beer, we should make, based on data, we should make this much, because that's also a problem. Breweries will see like, this beer sold great, let's make more, but they made more than they should have. Or less than they should have.
Or even the bars might have just gotten rid of it at some point, right? And they don't realize that, so now they're stuck with a bunch of extra.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So robotics is like an interest, and there's a difference between like, I'm really good at this thing, and then there's the business side of like, you're a CEO and a founder of a business.
Yeah.
So you talked about pivoting. How do you make the decision to either stick with something or try something new? Tell me about like kind of what goes through your head when you're thinking of ideas, and how to make your business viable as opposed to like, I'm great at this thing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think sometimes, and perhaps this is the engineering me, it's really easy for me to try new ideas. This particular method on the robot or on the device isn't working, let's try a different method. But when we totally switch products, especially from our first product, which we called the Carly at the time, that was actually a really painful decision for me, because we really believed in it. It was amazing. We had to pivot because it was about the viability of the business. Because anything that touches the medical market, there are a lot of other compliance, there's a lot of other bears to tackle in that space, regardless if you have the technical know-how. And so that was really one of the big reason that we changed direction. And that was such a painful decision, and it took longer than it probably should have. And I think the business suffered because of that. And so that was a big learning lesson, that it was either didn't matter that I love the product, that the business is first. And that even if you love the product or you love the idea of a product, doesn't mean you can never go to it later, but the business has to be viable, right? You have to have the foundation first. I do still think eventually we're going to have robots in the home. I think the biggest impact is still going to be in elder care and our aging population. But just that space is so hard now. Like, even if you look at exoskeletons, which have been out on the market for a while, you can't really get reimbursements from Medicare. They're just touching that right now. They're hard to get access to. They're very expensive. So even though it's going in that way, that space isn't ready yet. And so we decided that we wanted to move into a space where it was ready, and Zulubots could make an impact and still help people be independent, not feel like they have to sell out to bigger outfits because they can't compete technologically, and still make a dent in the community. I mean, local businesses, whether it be restaurants and breweries and bars, like, they still are businesses in the community, and you can help them and make an impact in the community. And so that was definitely a painful transition. Yeah. I had to put on my CEO cap, and I had to put it on hard.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's somebody sitting out there that like is getting ready to go down that road. So from your experience of, first of all, having to pivot, like, how do you know when to pivot? And then like, what do you pivot into? What's your advice to somebody who's sitting there in that same spot that you were?
So they always talk about pivot. It's like just a quick change, and the decision's not made overnight, and it's a bunch of little things. right? Like, oh, this product is we're not hitting our product milestones. Everything is costing a lot more than I expected. And you know, as an experienced builder, I've done expensive builds, and it still was, we weren't reaching milestones. There was issues with compliance. And so there was a lot of little things that started chipping away. I would say the decision to pivot, once it happens, it's quick, but it's brought on by like the death of 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
It's not like this overnight change, like, oh, I'm this amazing CEO. This is not working. Let's go in this other random direction that just popped into my head now. It doesn't happen that way.
It's more like this hasn't worked for the last year or 2 or 3.
Yeah, exactly. I think the accelerators were one of the things that helped me be able to pivot, because there were other companies in the accelerator that had to make big changes. And even though they were different industries, it kind of was just like, it brought me out of that, you know, robotics mindset. Like, oh, I'll figure it out. You know, it's just, this broke, it's okay. You figure it out, you find the solution, to it and be like, no, this is CEO time, and sometimes you have to make those decisions.
Wow. So WinLab is what we're talking about.
Yes.
And which cohort? Inaugural. So you're in the first cohort for
Yes, I was.
Babson's WinLab here in Miami.
Yes.
Wow. So you kind of talked just a minute ago about some of the benefits that it brought to you in terms of CEO thinking.
Oh, absolutely.
Tell us about that program.
The program was amazing. It was definitely in its growing stage. So that was really interesting because, you know, I've heard of Babson since I went to university in Massachusetts, but there were a number of people that hadn't really heard of Babson. I had never even heard of an all-female accelerator. So I'd just been introduced to the concept of accelerators, and I had only heard about like Y Combinator, some of the big tech ones, Techstars. And so we were really not at that point, and I didn't really think that they were for us. And so that was kind of like, okay, I guess a lot of people are telling me to go in that route. If you look at online at the general advice for tech entrepreneurs, that's where they tell you to go. And so, but I was at a networking event, and I met the director at the time, and she was the one like, no, Lizzie, this is a great opportunity, and it'll focus on your business, it'll help you grow, it'll give you a community to really feel like you're part of the community. Because that was another thing. WinLab is smaller than a lot of the other big accelerators, so you get to build more like a family. It's smaller and it's a longer period of time. So I felt like they would be able to go more in depth with us. So that was one of the things that really convinced me to apply.
So outside of the pivot, what would be, you know, your biggest takeaway from that experience? Not necessarily the curriculum, but like just the relationships, like, because you're 3 years out from that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like looking back, what's the biggest takeaway?
Definitely the relationships. The relationships with the other women in the cohort at the time. I still talk to them regularly whenever I see them at an event. Like, they're the first person I gravitate to, and we kind of tackle the event together, and that's really great. And then one thing that I really liked about WinLab is that they try with the alumni to still really keep in touch with us and help us connect us to resources. Michelle Abs, she wasn't the director at the time, but she reached out to the alumni when she became the director. You know, I have a great relationship with her because she facilitated that. And so I really appreciate that the program as a whole still facilitates trying to help their alumni grow. And then just the support from the women, because whenever one of us either is struggling or has questions, everyone's still really open to help you and support you.
So you mentioned that at some point you're going to go back to, or, you know, you're going to go back to the home, you know, the helping the person in a sense, you know.
Yeah.
But what's your outlook right now in terms of like the next what's your next big challenge that you're looking to, you know, overcome?
Our next big challenge, we're now moving into our first like manufacturing round. So the physical hardware and making and the actual like all of our prototypes up to now and the prototypes we've done our pilots with have all been hand built. But moving to the next stage, which is really small batch manufacturing, which the first few manufacturing runs, it's like, oh, the material I chose doesn't work at this temperature. We have to bring the machine temperature down. And there's a lot of material science and a lot of trial and error that goes into that. So the thing is, because you're testing, but you're actually buying material, it's very expensive. So it's sort of balancing that out is really our next big tactical challenge.
And does that happen here in Miami, or is it like overseas, or is it like across the country?
So that's here in Miami. That's another reason why I actually turned down applying to some other accelerators. There's, for example, if you're a hardware company, there's an accelerator called Bolt, which I got advice from a bunch of people that I was perfect for. But their whole thing is they actually take you to China and they introduce you to the manufacturers there and whatnot. They take you through that step. But my focus was always to build in Miami and build the company in Miami. And so from a vision standpoint, I would say that's probably been where I've had some challenges, because some people are just like, it'll be easier for you to do XYZ or go somewhere else. And like, that's not what I'm about. The whole point, I moved back to Miami to start my company here because I wanted to build here. And I really believe we have the capabilities here.
So tell me why that's so important to you. Because like you said, it would be way easier to go manufacture. Like when you think manufacturing, you don't think Miami.
Yes.
So you've got a much bigger purpose or why behind that. So.
Oh, absolutely. So Miami actually did have manufacturing of some sort back in the 1960s. You had huge textile factories in Hialeah, and you had a lot of things that were built in Hialeah. For example, there was this company called Coulter Corporation. They were bought out, and now they're called Beckman Coulter. They were bought out by a larger biomedical firm called Beckman. And they used to build and make, they still do, biomedical instrumentation. And they're down in Kendall, so South Miami-Dade County. And one of the best companies in the country, they literally invented the Coulter counter, which is what made counting red blood cells possible, and that's one of the most used tests now in hospitals. And so we have incredible research potential. My mom, she was an employee of the company, that's why I know. And she always says, my mom has this insane resume. She worked at NASA, she's worked at Microsoft and whatnot, and she will always say, the smartest people I ever worked with were at the research labs at Coulter.
Wow.
And that's my focus. And I see that we have wonderful vocational schools where these kids can design and build things. They make things in these on campus machine shops. And so we have people that are trained to make things. If you look artistically, we have a huge artistic ironworks industry from the sense of development. If you walk to if you go all through South Florida, you see these beautiful Spanish style houses with these beautiful ironwork. Well, that's made by people in machine shops here in South Florida. And so we have those capabilities, and there's something so empowering about making things with your hands, and it's so accessible. If you have someone that perhaps couldn't afford to go to college or doesn't see that as a pathway, they can pick up a trade in a faster amount of time. It's a way to be making money, making an income, and that doesn't close off a pathway to college. Sometimes I see that people think it's either trades, you work with your hands, or you go to college. That's not the case. I started off working in a machine shop, building my high school battle bots, and that's what got me hooked. And I was like, I want to make things, and I can make things being an engineer, and it's what led me to college. My dad paid for his engineering degree while being a mechanic on everything, planes, garbage trucks, cars, anything, right? Because once you can make things and you have those skills, you can apply them to so many different things. And so for me, I see it as a way to help the community, to help people that might not have access to the same educational opportunities, to have people have easier access to great incomes. And it's just a form of validation. Seeing pieces of things that do nothing, and when you put them together, they come alive, it is an incredible source of validation.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, on that note, how can people find out more about the products that Zulubots is building, and how, if they're a potential customer, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, they can email me at my company email, which is De Zulueta, so my first initial and last name, at zulubots.com. On Instagram, at Elizabeth De Zulueta, or on Twitter at De Zulueta. There's also a website, zulubots.com. And so...
Awesome. Elizabeth, thank you for being on Innovation City. This has been a fun conversation, and we wish you the best in the future.
Thank you so much.
For more episodes, visit innovationcity.co and be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. If you're in Miami, visit us at Venture Cafe on Thursday nights. You can find details at venturecafemiami.org and connect with us on social at We Are Slam and Venture Cafe MIA.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye.